Hello my friends, welcome or welcome back to my channel. It's Mama Ming here. In today's video, I want to share my experience with my recent chemical pregnancy. I actually vlogged the 2-week wait symptoms, and I also was thinking about publishing that video maybe before after this. So in this video, I want to talk about chemical pregnancy because apparently it's very common. It's very devastating because you just got excited and suddenly you lost a pregnancy. So a lot of my friends, they don't want to talk about it. But I think personally, it's just very beneficial when I go on the online forums or go onto YouTube videos to hear about other women who is going through the same thing. So if you are going through the same thing, or if you're curious, or if you feel like you have signs of chemical pregnancy and you came into this terms, you don't know what it is, I hope this video can be helpful to you. My little story is that I had 3 pregnancies so far. The first pregnancy that I had end up in miscarriage, and I miscarried my first baby at 7 weeks and 1 day. And so it was like an early miscarriage, but it was a little bit late because I already saw a heartbeat on the ultrasound, which was very devastating. It was a devastating miscarriage, and afterwards, 3 months later, I conceived my son. My son is currently 15, actually 16, almost 16 months old, which is very happy. So now that he's 16 months, we started trying again. We want to give him a little brother or sister. So this pregnancy ended up in a chemical pregnancy. And you're watching, what is chemical pregnancy? So chemical pregnancy refers to the pregnancy that end up early, usually before the 6 weeks part, before you can see a heartbeat from an ultrasound. Usually chemical pregnancy ended around 4 weeks pregnant, 5 weeks pregnant, maybe 5 weeks and several days before you were able to see a heartbeat in an ultrasound. That is why it's called chemical pregnancy or biochemical pregnancy, is because yes, you were pregnant and there was an embryo. It became a blastocyst and it was implanting into your uterus, maybe implanted for a day, maybe implanted for like several days, but for different reasons. Most of the times it's because of the genetic issues, the chromosomal abnormalities, that the embryo failed to further develop or implant like completely or correctly, and they end up miscarrying. So that's why it's called chemical pregnancy. Biochemical pregnancy is because you were pregnant and the embryo was producing the chemicals, the hormone levels. That's what we call HCG, and that you have a positive blood pregnancy test or you have a positive urine pregnancy test, but not for too long. The pregnancy test may be getting fainter, or it just disappeared, and then you're wondering if I'm pregnant or not, and then you started bleeding. You'll be like, oh, my period is here, maybe my period just late for a couple of days. So that is what we call chemical or biochemical pregnancy. It's a very, very early pregnancy loss compared to my first miscarriage. It happened at 7 weeks and 1 day, and we saw a heartbeat at an ultrasound, and my HCG level was a little bit lower than what we're supposed to expecting, because I was at 7 weeks, but my HCG level was at 6 weeks. So it was a sign that it may not be a good sign, but you never know. I had spotting and turned into bleeding, turned into crazy cramping, and I ended up miscarrying my first baby. This time, this miscarriage, it ended up in a chemical pregnancy, which makes this miscarriage super early. Here are my symptoms of my pregnancy, and here are the signs that I felt maybe this pregnancy didn't go well. And I just want to do a disclaimer that just because those are the signs that for me that I had a chemical pregnancy doesn't mean that if you have these signs, it means you will have a chemical pregnancy. I did go onto the forums. A lot of other women have the same symptoms. They did have a chemical pregnancy, but it doesn't mean that every time it's the same. This is actually the first cycle that we tried, and I was so surprised that I was actually pregnant. Usually it takes about 3 cycles for me to get pregnant. I felt very fertile the last month, so I was like, let's try it, because we were supposed to try the following month after our vacation. You know, if it's not meant to be, it's not meant to be. I'm not like identify as a religious person or whatever, but I do believe that when it comes to childbirth, babies, it's out of our hands. You've got to listen to the universe, listen to God. I want to share my symptoms starting from my 7 DPO. I used a ovulation kit to pinpoint the exact day of ovulation, and I also took my basal body temperature using my wearables. I did pinpoint 1 or 2 days that this is the day. It's either this day or the day a little bit passing this day is my day of ovulation. So even with your temping and even with your ovulation kit, there's no way to know what exact moment you ovulate, but you kind of know which day. So I'm gonna refer to DPO as days post past ovulation. So at 7 DPO is usually my embryo implants to my uterus. So at 7 DPO, I had a vivid dream. So this is actually very odd. In my vivid dream, I remembered having a positive pregnancy test where there are 2 lines, and I was looking at the lines and I was looking at my panty liners. Sorry for the TMI, and there were a lot of blood on my panty liners. I was like, I'm having a period, but I had a positive pregnancy test. And the doctor said, you are pregnant. You are pregnant. Even though you have a period, as long as you have a positive pregnancy test, it means you are pregnant. I just remember that moment in my dream at 7 DPO, and I was like, huh, interesting. I didn't know what to think of it. I was like, maybe I will have a positive pregnancy test. Maybe I am pregnant, but I have spotting. Maybe I'm pregnant, but maybe I will have a miscarriage, because I did have a miscarriage in the past. And every time I have that experience, maybe it's like past memories or it was just a little triggering, but at 7 DPO, that vivid dream was so weird. And usually I don't have vivid dreams when it comes to the luteal phase. I don't have vivid dreams during the PMS. I only have vivid dreams if I am pregnant. So at 7 DPO, I started to have vivid dreams, and I started to have vivid dreams every single day after 7 DPO. At 8 DPO, I actually had a dip in my basal body temperature. It was what they called implantation dip. It's not a good indicator if you're pregnant or implanted or whatever. A lot of women who have the dip are not pregnant, and also a lot of people who are pregnant also have the dip. So when I noticed that I had an implantation dip, my hopes were up, but I just remember that dream, and I was like, I'm gonna take a pregnancy test, and it was negative. I was like, oh, I was just overthinking this. And on Thursday, so that night, I also had vivid dreams, and then my basal body temperature started to rise up, which is also normal during the luteal phase before the days you're leading to period. On Thursday, I took another pregnancy test, and it was negative. And I was like, maybe I'm not pregnant, but I felt pregnant. So I did have symptoms that such as vivid dreams, my heart rate was higher, and I felt a little off. So I felt like I was pregnant, but it was negative pregnancy test. So I was very hopeful, but I still kind of remember that dream. At 9 DPO, so I think Thursday was a 9 DPO. It was between 9 and 10. I could never really pinpoint which exact day. So it's either 9 or 10. 11 DPO on that Friday, I did not want to test. I don't want to get my hopes up, keep testing and just drive myself crazy. I want to save my pregnancy test. I was using the Amazon cheapies, but again, I was using the whole pack. I was like, I want to save some for next week, the next month, next month, because it always took me like 3 months to get pregnant. So on Friday, I didn't test, but I had a lot of pregnancy symptoms at 11 DPO. So at 11 DPO, I didn't take any tests, but one of the pregnancy symptoms was swollen fingers, a little bit bloatedness, the puffiness of my fingers and my face. That's the first sign that I was pregnant in my previous pregnancy. And another pregnancy symptoms that I had was dizziness. I have low blood pressure most of the time, so it's very normal for me to feel dizzy, but usually it's in the morning. Usually by the time it's evening or afternoon, after I drink coffee, after I eat a lot of food, I don't feel dizzy anymore. But at 11 DPO, I felt so dizzy. Every time I squat down and lift up, if I'm doing squats, I just feel like my entire world is like, it's a little vertigo feeling, but it's more about dizziness, and I felt a little bit off and tired. So that was 11 DPO. Maybe it could be 10. We don't know exactly what it is. And another symptom that I felt really pregnant was on Friday when I drank a little bit of my cold brew that I got from Trader Joe's. I felt so shaky and anxious. I have a very high caffeine tolerant. I used to drink a lot of caffeine. I kind of toned down because I'm trying to conceive and everything, but the little bit of caffeine to me was like, I couldn't finish my morning coffee. I was taking smallest sips and a little bit of caffeine just elevated my heart rate, and I was just felt a hard time processing the caffeine. And the same thing happened on Saturday, which is a good sign. I also want to say I did have implantation bleeding. My implantation bleeding was actually at 11 and 12 DPO, which I felt it was really late. It's also a reason why I felt that I needed to take a pregnancy test, because at 11 DPO I thought I was going to be out, but suddenly I felt all the symptoms after I had a little bit of spotting, and it was like cervical mucus with a little bit pinkish mucus in there, so it's not bleeding bright red or whatever. So but yeah, 11 12 DPO I have a little bit implantation bleeding. That's why I knew I was pregnant to take a pregnancy test. 12 DPO on Saturday in the morning, when I woke up, the first thing I did was to take a pregnancy test. And that's the same feeling that I had in my previous pregnancy. Was like I felt pregnant in terms of I felt hot, I had vivid dreams again, and I felt dizzy, I felt tired, I just felt very off. And that is usually my signs of pregnancy. So at 12 DPO, I had a very faint line with the Amazon cheapies. I immediately went to the store, bought first response, and I had a very faint line, but it was more clear than my Amazon cheapies, because first response early detection, it detects your HCG level at 10. I was like, yay, I'm pregnant. But I just remember this dream. I was like, there's always a sign that I will bleed later. I felt like that dream is the craziest sign of what's going on. It's like I knew what's going on. But anyways, so at 12 DPO, I had a pregnancy test. I tested again in the afternoon, and it was faint, but I can see the lines a little bit even darker. I was like, oh my gosh, I am pregnant. I felt pregnant. On Sunday, which is 13 DPO. So I have this habit of testing my lines. If I have a faint line, I will keep testing until I have a solid line, just to make sure my lines are progressing. It was a habit from my previous pregnancy, because at 13 DPO that Sunday when I woke up, the first thing I was so excited is to take that pregnancy test and to see if the lines are progressing. And oddly, the lines are a little fainter than the Saturday, and I immediately burst into tears. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not pregnant or I'm miscarrying. I was just like so worried. And I was so emotional and so moody on that Sunday at 13 DPO, way more than normal, because I knew I was pregnant. That's how I felt when I was pregnant the first 2 times, is when I was pregnant, I became this very emotional person. Mood swings are really bad during my pregnancy, in my first and the second pregnancy. It's not about the sadness, it's the swing of the mood. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm so happy. Like, oh my god, I'm so sad. It's like crazy mood swings. So on that Sunday, I still felt pregnant even though the line was faint. So in the afternoon, I took another pregnancy test. It was slightly darker than the morning, but I still felt bad. I used a chippy that day, I think, for the second one. But anyways, I tested myself like 20 times. I'm on like 5 days. All right, that's 13 DPO. 14 DPO is actually my day of expected period. Most of the times people expect a period a little bit later, but for me, I have been having a little shorter cycle of 26 days. I also ovulated on cycle day 13 instead of 14. 2 more pregnancy tests, and they were actually getting darker. But it wasn't as dark as I should get compared to my first 2 pregnancy. This time I was like at 14 DPO, my lines were not progressing a lot. It was a warning sign for me, and I kept going on the forums to see what other moms are going through, and they all said, oh my gosh, my lines are not progressing. It's not progressing after 3-4 days, because usually your HCG level should double every 48 to 72 hours. So from Saturday to Sunday, from 12 DPO to 13 DPO, if it doesn't progress, it's fine. But from 12 to 14, if it doesn't progress, it's a warning sign. But at 14 DPO, I had a lot of pregnancy symptoms. It was hard for me to drink coffee. I had tingling sensations of my nipples and boobs. My boobs felt fuller and I felt a little bit more hot. I felt brain fog. I had puffiness. And in the afternoon, I went to the store. I bought more pregnancy tests. And in the afternoon, my line was actually darker. So I was a little bit happier, but I still felt unsure because by this time in my previous 2 pregnancies, it should have been like the test line at least similar color, similar darkness of my control line. Again, I just want to just disclaimer, I know a lot of women and I have seen a lot of women on the internet who didn't get a pregnancy test until like 16 DPO, like their 14 DPO line is very faint. So it just because you have a faint line doesn't mean you're gonna have a chemical pregnancy. The only reason I suspected a chemical pregnancy was that after 48 hours, my lines were not progressing as much as in the past. So I felt like my fetus is not, my embryo is not producing a lot of hormones. So here's the thing. Here is why I was suspecting a chemical pregnancy before I started really bleeding. So the reason why I suspected chemical pregnancy was that usually once your embryo implanted into your uterus, it will start to produce HCG. At the beginning, it was very low and it will double every 48 hours, it will double every 72 hours. So when it doubles, the line should go darker. So from one day to another, it probably doesn't get dark as much, but your HCG level actually is produced gradually and like steadily compared to like progesterones. Your progesterones are produced in pulses, so you will feel like suddenly you feel hot and you don't, and suddenly you felt hot again. So versus HCG level, it's slowly progressing, even though it says it doubles every 40 hours, but from 24 hours, it's still a little bit more increase. Second one is that late implantation sometimes is not a good sign because it may be because the viability, like the mobility, the livelihood, the liveliness of the embryo. So if the embryo didn't have the good genetic information, maybe the embryo, like it was like a not a great sperm, not a great egg when I met, and it's not very much, it's like having a hard time implanting, and after it took longer to implant, it took longer to produce the hormones. According to some research, especially earlier research, scientists, they don't know enough about this, but they've seen association that if implantation happened earlier, faster, and a HCG level produced a little bit faster, and it's usually a sign a healthier embryo implanted into the uterus. Again, like everyone is so different. Unless you actually track your cycle, maybe you just have a later ovulation day. So if you feel like, oh my gosh, I have a faint line and I already missed my period, maybe no, maybe your ovulation is late. So don't be alarmed when you hear about these things, but I just always go back to that dream because as a mom, you usually have like an intuition with what's going on, because the reason why I was also suspecting something bad was going to happen was also because when I was pregnant with my son, the day that the embryo implanted, it was like 5-6 days after ovulation. It was super early, like the earliest day you could start the implantation. I felt a pinch. I felt all the implantation symptoms, except for implantation bleeding. I didn't have any spotting, but I felt so full. I felt enough. I felt like so grateful. I felt the gratitude. I felt like, oh my gosh, I got everything I ever wanted. Oh my god, like it was I felt like after implants, it sends signals to your brain to produce certain hormones, and those hormones, like you bring, like intuitively, you know, like you're producing those hormones. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm so grateful. I'm pregnant with my son. Like I think it was like the day of the implantation, or even the implantation first started. So for this one, I just felt anxiety. I felt pregnant, but I felt way more anxiety. I felt that something was gonna go off. It's just not a great feeling. A lot of yoga, meditation, and part of it is to be in tune with my body and to be in tune with my mind. And I kind of know what's going on. I kind of knew this was not going on a good ending. There was a little bit of hope, and then I remember I was talking to my husband. I was like, I felt like it's gonna go bad. I blah blah blah. And my husband, like men, they don't know. Men, they don't. No matter if they're supportive of you, no matter how good they are, no matter like for example, when I was pregnant with my son, my husband was like, "Don't get your hopes up. Don't get your hopes up. How do you know you're pregnant? You just ovulated 5 days ago. How do you know?" I knew I was pregnant 5 days after ovulation. And he's like, "There's no way. There's no positive pregnancy test. There's no, like, don't get your hopes up. Don't get your hopes up too much." He didn't want me to get my hopes up and then not pregnant. But hey, he was wrong. This time he was like, "Why would you be so negative? Positive pregnancy test, even I can see the lines." And he started looking at cars. He started researching cars because our cars are small. He's like, "I'm going to trade in my car. I'm going to buy a new car for our growing family." He was getting excited. I was like, no, he just blamed me for being negative. He was like, "Why are you a negative person? Like last time you were so like hopeful. You were like so sure, even though you didn't." But I just freaking knew, okay? Sorry, I'm getting myself so worked up about this. 14 DPO, when I had a darker line, I had all the pregnancy symptoms. Sore boobs, sore nipples, kind of fuller of, like, I felt more puffiness, and I felt very dizzy. I felt very off. I felt very tired. I went to bed super early that day. I just felt all of the pregnancy symptoms. Because also my lines were darker, so I was feeling the effect of HCG. That night, I also had a lot of vivid dreams, but they're not related to pregnancy. And I woke up at 4 with the worst migraine on my left side. And I just had this feeling, oh God, I'm getting my period back. Crazy pulsing migraines is usually a symptoms personally for me to get my period. It's a result of the dropping of the progesterones. The reason why I knew was because after I stopped breastfeeding, after I had crazy migraines over the month that I stopped breastfeeding because of my reactions to the progesterones, and right before my period came back, right before my period is here, I just had this worst migraine of my life that I've never had in my life. So I just had this feeling in my mind that, oh my gosh, my period has come back because my progesterone dropped. And I felt so cold, because one of the pregnancy symptoms that experienced by almost all women is an elevated body temperature because of the progesterones, and also elevated heart rate. So one of the symptoms I felt that day was my heart rate, my resting heart rate was low. And I felt so cold at 4 a.m. when I first woke up. I felt like freezing. I live in Texas and it was September, so you do the math, it's not that freezing. But I felt so cold, I felt the migraine, and then I went to the bathroom. I didn't even bother to take a pregnancy test. I just felt really, really sad, and I just tried to get myself back to sleep because I have a toddler, you know, I have to get ready for him. So when I first finally woke up again at like 7, I took a pregnancy test with the Amazon GP. I didn't want to use the first response. I just had a feeling my period was gonna come back. I just had this feeling that it's over, because I don't feel pregnant anymore. It's just the weirdest feeling. So I don't want to waste my first response. I have 2 more pack. I want to save it for the next month. So I took the Amazon GP again, and the line went from a very visible faint line to the shadow, like it felt like 12 DPO. So it went from a 4 DPO darker line to the 12 DPO that you can barely see. It's kind of like squint, and then maybe there's a shadow. I was like, oh, it's over. And I felt so sad. And later I was getting ready. I used the bathroom, and when I wiped, I noticed bright red bleeding. That's different from implantation bleeding. I did have a little implantation bleeding this cycle. But this time it's bright red. So I knew immediately, this is the starting of my miscarriage, or you call it the miscarriage period. And of course, later that day, it was 15 DPO. Later that day in the afternoon, I felt wherever the baby implant, I knew exactly where the baby implant, and I felt that particular spot cramping. It's crazy. It's not the same as a normal period cramping, because normally the period cramping is like the entire uterus feel a little full and I feel a little bit but I don't have a lot of cramps. It's more dull-y uncomfortableness, versus this one, I feel a very sharp pull from wherever I felt the implantation. It was on the left side of my uterus, I believe, and I just felt that cramp on the 15 DPO on the first day of period, and then the second day of period was when my actual period came. So the first day of my period, the 15 DPO, is when I saw a lot of clotting. There was not a lot of bleeding actually. Every time I go to the bathroom, I passed down some of the clots, But at the second day of my period, it's more like a bleeding, like a normal uterine lining shed. There's not as much clotting as the first time. So that's how I knew. The clots are probably where the embryo was. I saw a little bit, it's kind of gross, but it's like a super small thing that's like a little developed, like a ball of clots, and just pass through on the first day, like when I felt the pinch. And afterwards, I don't feel any cramps anymore. I don't feel any pinch anymore, because I miscarried so early. The first time I miscarried, it was like my entire uterus is going into a whirl just to get the embryo, and it was like a sac. I passed out like an egg looking thing, but oh well, that is the end of the story. The bright red was a telltale sign for me that I am miscarrying, because my first miscarriage started with a little spotting, and then it just went bright red, and then I started miscarrying. Yeah, but before you go, I just want to do like a little biggest takeaway of this story. So first thing is, chemical pregnancy is so early that most women don't even notice. If you've never been pregnant before, if you don't know what pregnancy feels like, if you don't feel pregnant enough to take a pregnancy test, there is a chance you just notice you have a heavier period, you have a little bit more clots that week. Maybe your period is like 1 or 3 days late, maybe 1 week late, but your period still came. That is completely normal. And most women don't notice chemical pregnancy. They don't notice the miscarriage that early on. That's why a lot of times it's not talked about compared to the miscarriage that happened around 6, 7, 8 weeks or a little bit later. The second thing I want to talk about is that the reason why I knew was because I was so in tune with my body. But if this is your first pregnancy, you're getting faint lines and stuff, don't be so scared, because I know a lot of women have super faint lines 3 days past their period, and it also depends on what pregnancy test you're using. So don't be too alert. Talk to your medical professional about what's going on with your body. And third thing is that chemical pregnancy is actually really common, and actually miscarriage is very common. Study shows that 1 in 4 pregnancies end up in miscarriage, and this number could be actually high because the study shows that 1 in 4 clinically recognized pregnancy and a miscarriage, which means clinically recognized means they see a sac in ultrasound, they see an embryo, and maybe it's a miscarriage, maybe the fetus doesn't have a heartbeat, but usually that means that the embryo, the fetus is already formed. Versus chemical pregnancy is so early, you're just losing a group of several hundred cells, by this time probably 500 cells. So it's so early that most people don't even report that. So there were actually certain research suspect that actually 1 in 3 pregnancies actually end up in miscarriage, if you consider that chemical pregnancy in there, because a lot of times people don't even know, and a lot of times like they don't even go to a healthcare professional. I had a chemical pregnancy. I didn't even go to my doctor because it just happened naturally that I miscarried, and I don't feel any like heavy bleeding, like I'm dying or anything. And I felt okay. People like checking on me. I felt okay because I felt like it's okay because my body is still doing okay. Then I'm hopeful that I'll get pregnant in the future. And the next thing, is it 3 or 4th, that I want to talk about is that there is a type of pregnancy that can become life-threatening. It's called ectopic pregnancy. Is when the embryo implant the fallopian tubes. So if it's what they call tubal pregnancy, PM tubes, it can become dangerous because it could burst your tubes. And it's important that if you realize you're pregnant and you started bleeding, call your doctor. The reason why I didn't feel the need, I did text my midwife in the past. She's a friend. I don't go to her anymore. She switched to hospital. I have a different OBGYN, but she's a friend, so I texted her and she's like, it's okay. I don't have any cramping or anything. But if you're pregnant and notice bleeding, cramping, go to the hospital, talk to your doctor. It could be emergency situations if you have bleeding and cramping during pregnancy. It could be a life-threatening scenario. Ectopic pregnancy happened to 1 to 2% of women of pregnancies. I I was so scared, honestly, that this would be a ectopic pregnancy because I have a bleeding disorder, but from what I know, it doesn't seem like it. My pregnancy test is going to negative now, so that is also a good sign. Another thing of ectopic pregnancy is that there is a chance it will resolve on its own, that your body realizes it's not implanted in the right place, and it will just terminate the pregnancy and just get rid of the embryos so that you're not in a life-threatening scenario. So whatever it is, I'm glad that I am okay. Because now that I think about it, you always want to look at a positive side. I am a very positive person. I always look at a positive side. The positive side is I'm okay. I didn't have ectopic pregnancy. I didn't have to go through the whole using the medicine to induce and the whole cramping and the going to the ER and taking notice there's a heartbeat and the next day the heartbeat is gone. It was just such an emotional journey, my first miscarriage. I'm glad that this time it's okay and I can try again next month. The last thing I want to talk about is that there is nothing you did wrong that caused a miscarriage. I want to reassure you because I talked to my doctor the first time I was feeling guilty. So most of the times miscarriages are due to chromosomal abnormalities, and early pregnancy loss like this, it's even more likely to due to chromosomal abnormalities, like the eggs had the wrong genetic information or the sperm had the wrong genetic information. So it is good that we didn't bring a baby to this world that is suffering, and I do believe in the universe, or if you're religious, you believe in God, that the universe has the best for you. Like if this is not meant to be, if the baby is brought to this world to suffer, maybe the universe or God is not, that they don't want to see your baby to suffer. That's why they end up the pregnancy before there is even a heartbeat. So I am grateful that I'm okay. I'm grateful that I'm healthy. I'm grateful that I'm fertile. I'm actually happy that I conceived the first month of trying, so I'm gonna keep on trying. So I just want to share the story with you, and I hope this can help some other women out there. Thank you so much for watching. If you find this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up, and if you've had experience with this, if you're comfortable, share your experience in the comment section, and if you could subscribe to this channel, it really means the world to me to join the fam, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.